Hello, all. Not sure if there's anyone out there. Please join in. We're just going to be having a just chatting, kind of, but we're going to be talking about a little article that I made reference to in one of our conversations, and anyone wanting to jump in is able to. Like, I'm going to allow. I'll allow it. Anyone who wants to come in and have a conversation about an article that really shaped a lot of my thinking on this topic or put it in a particular context. So maybe you're just going to listen to me reading an article, and you know what? That's fine. Let me share it with everyone. Okay. So this is The Reality of Spirits, a tabooed or permitted field of study. And this is by Edith Turner. If you were just looking up Edith Turner. Edith Turner, anthropologist. Edith Turner, from 1921 to 2016, was an English-American anthropologist, poet, and post-secondary educator, in addition to collaborating with her husband, Victor Witter Turner, on a number of early sociocultural research projects concerning healing, rituals, and communitas. She continued to develop these topics following his death in 1983, especially communitas. Edith Turner contributed to the study of humanistic anthropology and was a dedicated social activist her entire life. So she's also, within her academic life, you can find textbooks that she's written. She worked in the field for quite a long time. She's known within the field, and so that's one of the reasons why this little piece that I'm going to be sharing with you today is such a big deal. Mark, join us. Join me, I guess. At this point, I can see Mark's there. Mark, join in. I'd love to have a conversation with someone else about this as well. So this little section that we're going to be getting into, the reality of spirits, which I think overlaps with a lot of the little conversations that we were having in the corner. So in the past, in anthropology, if a researcher went native, it doomed him academically. My husband, Victor Turner, and I had this dictum at the back of our minds when we spent 2.5 years among the Ndumbu of Zambia in the 50s. All right, our people believed in spirits, but that was a matter of their different world, not ours. Their ideas were strange and a little disturbing, yet somehow we were on the safe side of the white divide and were free merely to study the beliefs. So right out the gate, there's a term there. Mark, that's all right. I'm just glad you're listening. There's right out the gate this idea that you could have someone going native, which is an expression I heard a whole bunch, but I imagine they've stopped using. But it's referring to the idea that you could actually get wrapped up into a culture and involved in it, and you might actually believe what they're doing. How terrifying, right? Which is the whole point of this article. So we were on the safe side of the divide. This is how we thought. Little knowing it, we denied the people's equality with ours, their covalness, their common humanity, as that humanity extended itself into the spirit world. Try out that spirit world ourselves? No way. But at intervals, that world insisted it was really there. For instance, in the Chahamba ritual, at the end of a period of ordeal, a strong wave of curative energy hit us. We had been participating as fully as we knew how, thus opening ourselves to whatever entities that were about. In another ritual for fertility, the delight of dancing in the moonlight hit me vividly, and I began to learn something about the hypnotic effect of singing and hearing the drums. So this first bit, she's at essentially a worship service, and whether or not she believes it, she can feel the emotional interaction. Okay. So we're at a safe level right now. Thank you, Edith. But continue on. Much later, Vic and I witnessed a curious event in New York City in 1980 while running a workshop at the New York University Department of Performance Studies, which was attended by performance and anthropology students. With the help of the participants, we were trying out rituals as actual performances with the intention of creating a new educational technique. Can you imagine? You show up to this thing and it's a worship service essentially, but the people there aren't actually legitimately believing in what they're doing. They're just doing a performance. Okay. So again, that might seem safe, might seem a little bit odd, certainly seems a little bit odd to me, but you know what? I'd attend this. I'd attend a ritual even if it was all done by performance students. Seems like it could be something to witness. We enacted the Umbanda trance session, which we had observed and studied in one of the slums of Rio de Janeiro. The students duly followed our directions, and also accompanied the rites with bongo drumming and songs addressed to the Yoruba gods. During the ritual, a female student actually went into a trance right there in New York University. We brought her around with our African rattle, rather impressed with the way this ritual worked, even out of context. Mark, this actually, I'm glad that you are specifically listening, because this kind of reminds me of some of the stuff you were doing. You can do these meditative techniques, and it doesn't matter if you're in the culture, doesn't matter if you believe in them. These things can have an effect on you, right? And that's what I think you can kind of see here. So the ritual worked even out of context. The next day, the student told us that she had gone home that night and correctly predicted the score of a crucial football game, impressing us even further. So she does this ritual and predicts a football game score. Great. Okay, maybe you're not convinced. Since then, I have taken note of the effects of trance and discovered for myself that the three now obvious regularities: frequent, non-empirical cures, clairvoyance, which includes finding lost people or objects, divination, prediction or forms of wisdom speaking, and satisfaction or joy. These three effects repeated almost like a covenant. Guys, if you get involved in anthropology, just a warning. What spirit events took place in my own experience? One of them happened like this. In 1985, I was due for a visit to Zambia. Before going, I decided to come closer than on previous occasions to the Africans' own experience. Whatever that was, I did not know what they experienced. So it eventuated. I did come closer. My research was developing into the study of a twice repeated healing ritual. To my surprise, the healing of the second patient culminated in my sighting a spirit form. In a book entitled Experiencing Ritual, I described exactly how this curative ritual reached its climax, including how I myself was involved in it, how the traditional doctor bent down amid the singing and drumming to extract the harmful spirit, and how I saw, with my own eyes, a large gray blob of something like plasma energy emerge from the sick woman's back. Then I knew the Africans were right. There is spirit stuff. There is spirit affliction. It is not a matter of metaphor and symbol or even psychology. And I began to see how anthropologists have perpetuated an endless series of put downs about the many spirit events in which they participated in a kindly pretense. They might have obtained valuable material, but they have been operating with the wrong paradigm, that of the positivist denial. Okay, you following that? She sees and this is where I think when I was talking to Sam, I felt you could pick this underlining, like her kind of being like, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? Right. This is also very, very interesting coming from myself, a Christian perspective. There are healings in the New Testament, things that we would now never say had a spiritual dimension, but Jesus will cast out a spirit of insert disease here. And here in this healing ritual, a gray blob of something like plasma emerges from a woman's back. This is something which Edith saw with her own eyes. And Paul, if you are watching, you'll notice that Edith Turner is able to describe these things without using a particular word. She doesn't need to use the word literally to get her ideas across. How crazy is that? You don't need to use that word. People can still understand what you're saying. Wow. Sorry. I knew the Africans were right. There is spirit stuff. There is spirit affliction. It is not a matter of metaphor and symbol or even psychology. And I began, okay, yeah, so we already read that, but yeah, there you go. To reach a peak experience in a ritual, sinking oneself fully in it really is necessary. Thus, for me, quote, going native achieved a breakthrough to an altogether different worldview, foreign to academia, by means of which certain material was chronicled that could have been gathered in no other way. So you have to participate. You have to enter the perspective. I just think this is absolutely fascinating. I've seen interviews with Edith Turner where they ask her, do you believe in God? And she says, I mean, I have to now. Right? She kind of goes, well, if you get involved in this, you see the things I see. And in some places, I've even heard her talk about, like, us anthropologists who have actually worked in the field for long enough. We all know this is legit, right? We've all seen some stuff that we can't explain. Looks like we got a couple more people watching in right now. If any of you want to join, please, just reposted the link for StreamYard. Please join in. To reach a peak experience in a ritual, sinking oneself fully in it really is necessary. Thus, for me, going native achieved a breakthrough to an altogether different worldview, foreign to academia, which I feel really relates to how Sam was talking about this, that it is in fact foreign to academia. Hello, Laura. Feel free to join in. On the subject of radical participation, Dan Ross predicted that students will seek to place themselves in unfolding situations, to live through complex ongoing events, rather than looking alone for the meaning of gestures, the presentations of selves, class relations, the meaning of ritual, or other abstract analytical category phenomena on which we historically have relied. Jackson helps to make this point, quote, to break the habit of using a linear communicational model for understanding bodily praxis. It is necessary to adopt a methodological strategy of joining in without ulterior motive and literally putting oneself in the place of other persons, inhabiting their world, what was pejoratively labeled going native in the early days of anthropology. So essentially, you can't be objective, and there's things that you cannot see when you are going objective. But to enter subjectively, there are things which you which you see with your eyes. I was going to use the word literally. I'm going to try truly, truly see. She is not saying that she imagined or visualized. It was as though there appeared to her something, that she, with her eyes, observed a spirit. That's something that other people can observe. Now, what if we gave all of these people, we gave them the pieces of paper to write down, what are you observing? Here's a clipboard. You be scientists while you're doing this thing. Participation thus became an end in itself rather than a means of gathering closely observed data, which will be subject to interpretation elsewhere after the event. I've talked to people before about my interest in punk rock, and the first time I observed the punks in their native environment. I showed up to a punk show not really listening to that style of music, maybe a little bit, but I went because I had a friend in the band, and I just like observed what a mosh pit was and like watched like an anthropologist. But pretty soon I was like, I actually really like this culture and I want to participate. I want to be in it. And that became for its own sake, not merely as an outsider observing. And there's so much of life right now which is in observation, and we need to, as Grimm would say, break the fourth wall to go in. But when you become a character in the play, then you get wrapped up in the play or in the movie in a way you don't when you are just an audience member. And so you could possibly see things that if you open yourself even in the least bit, you're going to be amazed at what you see with your eyes, not what you picture, not what you imagine, what actually literally enters your eyes. Later in 1987, when I went to northern Alaska to conduct research on the healing methods of Inupiat Eskimos, I similarly found myself swamped with stories of strange events, miracles, rescues, healings by telephone hundreds of miles away, visions of God, and many other manifestations. It was by these things that the people lived. Their ears were pricked up for them, as it were. I spent a year in the village acting as a kind of pseudo auntie, listening to and believing the stories. And naturally, those things happened to me about as frequently as they did to them. For instance, it happened that in July 1987, before I went to Alaska or knew the ecology at first hand, Sandy has just texted me and says, seriously, a talk on spirits and I'm at work? Sandy, I love you. You know I love you. Or I hope you do. I hope this is something you enjoy. So watch it whenever you're done. Okay, Sandy? Thanks for the text. Just so you know, the role of auntie in Indigenous culture is actually, I'd say, almost like an official role, right? A way of thinking about it is in Christianity, there's a role of elder, and it doesn't mean, oh, that person is old. That's a position within the community, okay? So when she describes herself as an auntie, pseudo auntie, I think that you need to understand that she, within this context, begins. It's a role within the culture that she seems to take on. Give me 1 second, guys. 1 second. There was a fan going, and I didn't know if people were constantly hearing that and being annoyed. So now you're not annoyed. Good for you. Agony aunt. Yeah, if you watch, even if you just watch Indigenous stuff, TikTok, you'll see that they refer to women as auntie. That will be a person with a female with any level of authority will be called auntie, even if it's just like a female friend. If she's in a high enough position, will get that title. For instance, it happened that in July, before I went to Alaska or knew the ecology at firsthand, I attended a Harmer shaman workshop in Virginia. He was teaching the workshop participants how to make a shamanic journey while lying down in darkness. We were to visualize a climb upward, up a tree or a mountain or a building or the like. After the first stage of visualization, the experience itself was liable to take over, and we would meet a, quote, teacher of some kind. We lay down, and Michael beat his drum steadily. I visualized my ascent and found myself out on a bank of cloud. How corny, I said. A figure appeared to my left, a monk in a cowl, and again I thought, how corny, like a cartoon. I went up a little more and came to an entire wall of electrical appliances, VCRs, CD sets, stereos, radios, and a large TV screen toward the right. Pictured in the screen was something dark red, filling the whole rectangle. It looked like a maze of internal organs, sideways on, elongated, and definitely unlike human internal organs. Why were they there? What was that all about? Okay, so one of the things I like to note is that Edith Turner, while doing this ritual and having this experience, she is still able to judge the situation. She's still, while experiencing it, there's a sense in which even if she is making fun of it, is still able to see this stuff. Hi, Mark. Mark, you're muted. Okay. Mark, you're listening in, but you're still muted. I accept you the way you are.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah. So
yeah. I've got to get my settings. I get my settings sorted out. Sorry, don't mean to interrupt. Just keep going.
Okay. I'm really glad to have you here after some of your experiences with meditation, which occurred before you believed in them. And even while you're having those experiences, I don't know if this is your experience, you can be like, for me, I have been in church services, felt something compelling happening, and also could feel myself being like, this is ridiculous, isn't it? Is this really happening? Yeah. So
yeah. I'm going to be off camera for a little bit, and then
I'll
keep listening, and I'll stay off mic unless I have something to offer. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So C is a VCR set kind of a thing of internal organs, but they're not like humans. Let's see where this goes, shall we? But I must not criticize. And when the drumming changed, I went down the way I had come and eventually remembered that I was lying on the floor. The other participants were sitting up around me. We told our experiences to Harner. He accepted them, but did not analyze them psychologically. Okay? No Freudian dream interpretation for Edith. Okay? Just sit with it. That's it. 4 months later in November, when I was settling among the Eskimos at Point Hope, Alaska, sitting in Ernest Frankson's house, Ernest pulled into the room the body of a ringed seal. His wife laid the seal on some cardboard and proceeded to take off the skin. She allowed me to help cut off the blubber. Then she made a slit down the stomach and displayed to view the internal organs. Wondering, I contemplated them carefully. It was striking to see the dark red parts, liver, spleen, intestines, lungs, heart, and so on, settled there, sliding together with such orderliness and easy movement. 2 days later, I caught on, as my diary records, those internal organs were the same organs that I had seen on the Shaman TV screen in July. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, I mean, come on, like, of course, we know what internal organs look like. No, you don't. I don't know what looking inside of a seal, how their organs are separated and put together, especially because of blubber, because of fat, because of all these things. In fact, there used to be traditions that people would do shamanistic practices and interpret future events just by laying out the internal organs of animals, because sometimes when you open them and stuff, things would move, things would look a particular way. That it's not singular. And so Edith has this experience and just says, okay, that's what I saw. I saw exactly that. Ernie caught himself a whale the following April. I use the word caught in keeping with Eskimo etiquette towards the whale. I was working for another whaling crew and was occupied with cooking for the men. We waited on the edge of the ice, but no whales came near. An English BBC man was staying in my house in the village, hoping to film the whale hunt. Ernie said, "The whales don't like filming." Well, what could I do? Turn the BBC man out? One day, while my crew and I were down on the ice, a dangerous wind came up, and we left in a hurry, observing widening cracks as we made for the beach. After that, no whaling was possible for 2 weeks. Finally, the BBC man was refused his request to film the whaling and left town. The minute he left, the wind changed back in our favor. All was well, and Ernie caught his whale with our assistance. Ernie simply said, "The whale can change the weather." The whole village, including me, understood the matter in the same way. Seriously. I love it. This kind of reminds me of the ayahuasca stories that were kicking around, that when the indigenous people were asked, well, how did you know to combine this with this? Like, these are very unrelated plants. It's a very, very complicated process in order to make these psychedelic drugs. And the indigenous response is, well, the plants told us. That's the best explanation we have. It's super weird. I don't know what the heck we are supposed to do with it. Yeah. The whales can change the weather. The whole village, including me, understood the manner in the same way. Ernie often accused me of not believing in these manifestations, but I protested that I did. How could I help it? Ernie usually had a bad time from whites who labeled his experience magical beliefs. But by then, I myself was within the circle of regular Eskimo society and experienced such events from time to time. I am now learning that studying such a mentality from inside is a legitimate and valuable kind of anthropology that is accessible if the anthropologist takes that fatal step toward going native. You finding this interesting, Mark?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great. Can hear you
Okay.
great.
Good. Yeah. No, it's yeah, it's the magical thinking part is a factor too. I mean, you're going to get, I think these practices, particularly the ones I involved myself with, certainly made me more intuitive, more sensitive. And you did have some, you certainly had just strange experiences with nature,
Right.
It's, I went through a period of, really trying to practice no harm. And so even with insects, and as I got better at it, as I kept practicing, just to catch, a cockroach would come into the house, and I just sit there and it sounds really stupid going in the back, but it really happened. It was just like, you just sit there calmly, put your hand out, and it just would crawl up into my hand, and you carry it out. Weird things like that.
Hmm.
Um, Whereas now it's like I'm just back to getting rid of the cockroaches, because what happens is or the ants, because um, at some point they decide to nest and make you can't throw them out fast enough, so you have to kill them, and so it's back to dog eat dog. Um,
I've no. My wife is one of these people. One of my friends is one of these people that has some weird Snow White experiences with with animals. Right, like a friend of mine, her and her husband. She just walked up to a squirrel
yeah.
and spoke to it and said, "Oh, you're a nice little squirrel. Do you want to come home with me?" And it crawled up her, sat on her shoulder, and lived with them for like 2 months.
Yeah.
It's just like, and they just fed it. They took care of it like a pet. And when it was done, it left. But it was just like she had experiences like that. My wife gets so close to animals and like seems to have conversations with them. My wife will be driving and all of a sudden she'll get a sense for something and she'll slow down. And then about 20 seconds later, there'll be an animal at the side of the road about to cross. And if she was driving the previous speed, she would have hit it.
Yeah, that's
And
very cool.
and she has dreams that are predictive. And at some point, she tells me one of these dreams, and I act like it's not interesting. Not that it's not interesting, just that it's not mind blowing. She's like, "Why are you acting like this isn't mind blowing?" Just like, because Katie, it's every other month with you. Every other month, you have one of these. And when we were first dating, like when I was just dating my wife, I didn't believe that she was really having these dreams because her dreams would have like a perfect 5 act structure. She'd have a one part, she'd wake up, go back, and it would have like a sequel that resolves the issues of the first part, right? And she would write some of these things down, and then a week later, 2 weeks later, they would be like fulfilled in life. And I'm just like, okay, right? And if you're someone who deals with these things, I think it's interesting because the people who experience them, even if they are within faith traditions, it really pushes the limits of the faith tradition. And they
Oh yeah.
just go, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. What the heck is
No,
this? Because
no, no question.
it doesn't work within those kind of these simple restrictions.
It's funny you would pick this topic because it kind of ties into what PVK was talking about this morning in his early morning upload, where it's traversing imaginal and actual faith traditions, and it's got um, he seems to he appears to straddle, and of course, if pressed, he'll land very much in the actualized, historical, traditional, reformed
Mm-hmm.
theological position. But he's unlike most in that tradition. He's willing to give space for a variety of people and voice too, guys that differ quite significantly from himself, from
Yeah, and
PVK,
I've
from
witnessed
Vicky to yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
some, like I have a friend, and then there was some cases of public figures who have talked about this, who are church planting, and they might come from a non-charismatic background, and in the middle of persecution or difficulty or all this kind of stuff. Some of this was during COVID. Some of this was like, and people were very desperate to meet. And he was meeting in secret with someone, and they had some history in the occult. Um, they will have experiences that don't line up with their spiritual background, where these would be people who would believe that the spiritual gifts have ceased, and now they're in a situation where, like in the middle of a prayers or middle of something, all of a sudden something takes hold, and now they have to contend with the fact, I don't think this is real, and I just saw it happen, right?
Yeah.
I worked with a guy who was like this, who was a former charismatic, had experience with speaking in tongues and a whole bunch of stuff, and like didn't believe it, but had personal experience in it. And he didn't resolve it and say, oh, that was just this or that was just that. He just went, I don't know what to do with that.
Well, it's what I ultimately came down to is because because the powers don't seem to, what you might call signs and wonders, to use charismatic language. Signs and wonders don't seem to be limited to just Christianity or even one form of Christianity. We see them scattered, just peppered everywhere, you know.
Yeah, and people don't, a lot of the charismatics don't know that there's speaking in tongues in multiple religions.
Right.
Oh, it's not exactly. In one place. Because one of the things that people want to do is they want to turn certain practices safe.
Right.
They want to turn things safe. And yeah, nothing is safe. Nothing is.
But there needs,
nothing is only in your tradition.
What made it the only way? Because I had to make it functional, and I also needed to. That is functional for me, you know, without radically dysregulating my own quality of life and state of mind. So I ended up just coming up with a real basic sort of guardrail system, because you do see a lot of amateur yogis go off into occult practices and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And the dividing line of the guardrail for me was, is it in service of power for myself, or is it in some way in service to myself, or am I experiencing this, or am I seeking to, whatever it is, if my spiritual practice in service of others and love. So that was even when I didn't have much faith in God to speak of. That was a guardrail that I carried over from my Christian upbringing.
Right.
Kind of the Sermon on the Mount stripped of the supernatural at one point. That was always the thing that kept me going, was that those were my guide rails. And to have that, so that even when I saw people go off the deep end, and they'd be practicing tarot or various forms of seeking clairvoyance or something like that. It's just like, well, why are you doing it? Because I have a friend, a Facebook friend, who has lived in Haiti, and I've known her for quite a while now, over a decade. And so for her, it's like the whole voodoo scene is for real, man. And you would never be able to convince her otherwise. Yeah. And so my thing is as well, because of course adjacent to voodoo is Santeria, right? Yeah. And that's on the island as well. And so what's your guardrail? And in her case, she's a very loving person. She would never, ever use spiritual power she wouldn't pray to God to smite her enemies, in Jesus' name. And I've seen Christians pray those prayers. You see those prayers in the Psalms.
Well, and I feel that a lot of people, the place where I see it the most, Trey, I completely disagree. We can talk about
I can't see. What's his comment?
He said the more you talk about demons, the more power you give them that they don't have. I, to some extent, disagree, because part of what happens is there's certain situations where you're just witnessing what they are. And I don't have a lot of experience with them in my life. I believe that spiritual powers are
Yeah, I didn't even know we
legit.
were talking about demons, but okay. I thought we were talking about something else, so that's okay. Are
Well,
we?
so I mean that's where Trey's going, because we're talking
Yeah,
about spiritual influence, spiritual practice, how
right.
people experience all those things.
Gotcha.
I wish I didn't say that. I wish I didn't bring that up at that point, because I was riffing on what you were saying, and I feel like I lost it.
Oh, let's catch it. Let's find it. We can find it. No, I was talking about voodoo and guardrails and
So what I would say is that the place where I see people using it the most is as forms of divination. I don't
mm,
see within my daily life people using these practices with the intention of trying to harm, curse, or anything. What I see is um, is horoscopes and is forms of that. People asking that God will reveal who their partners are, all these
you're
things,
right.
which has
Yeah.
been traditionally always what people use divination for. We have reference to people um, to trying to manifest, for lack of a better term, because that's the way that people describe it now, um, things within their lives, to know things, how things are going to happen. They will do these practices,
Mhm.
and that these have very very long traditions. And yes, I believe that they can be effective. Um,
I don't. The thing I'm struggling with at the moment is how to navigate the corner in this with this material
yeah,
with such diversity of opinion because we're not just we're it feels like I'm less alienated from say Jacob and Hezi as a Christian. I mean, as
right.
a I'm a Bible thumper, believe it or not. And so I'm but I have closer relationship with them than I do with guys like Anselman, who I've never met, so I don't know what this person. I don't know if he's even a he. Um, but some of the statements that I get from the more super reactionary, super conservative, we seem to have a conservative group of Christians who become very dogmatic on certain positions. I don't know how I can't thread the needle. I don't know. I mean, I just try to maintain relationship in the best possible way, but at some point it seems like the rubber band's going to break, right? There's just only so much tension a community can withstand, it seems, before. Do you know what I'm saying? Because this subject is going to stir up. It's
Well,
there's
okay.
maybe
So
10 people watching, and we already got a negative comment.
no, it's all right. It's all right. Um, so with within Judaism, I mean, okay, so this becomes complicated. There is within Christianity and within Judaism a concept of spirits. Um, if I'm unless I'm mistaken, they're sometimes called shadim in Jewish thinking, which are sometimes regional gods. There could be, and their spiritual forces. There's discussion in the New Testament about ministering spirits, and it's funny in that hideous strength. The character of Merlin is there, and he's a wizard, but he comes from so long ago that it wasn't demonic. He just like what now would be considered divination and not particularly good. He's from such a long time past that you could just see how the spirits were doing things and know the future and all these other things. Um, you know, you have things like fairies, you have things like characters that make things happen in the spiritual realm. The problem is that within the Old Testament, within the Hebrew Scripture, there is um, there is reference to the fact that these um, lower spiritual beings had some kind of a rebellion in and of themselves. So if you were talking to a first century Jew or Christian, and they talked, and you talked to them about the fall, they would have said there were 3 separate falls. 3, not 1, 3, and that we were being affected by all 3 of them. And modern Christianity is really only interested in one of those falls.
So what are the 3 falls?
The 3 falls would be, so human beings, their disobedience. Then you have the falling of the spiritual entities.
The 1/3, 2/3, that thing.
Yes, yeah, but this would be lined up, and then Babel would be brought into it. So,
Okay.
so the idea is that the world, there's an issue with the world itself, and when the Most High divided the nations, he gave these different sections, these different areas were to be taken care of by different spiritual gods. And it would not be sinful for the people of those areas to worship the one true God through worshiping these gods, right? In the same way you could pay taxes to a king, that wouldn't jeopardize you believing in God. You could also, you could in some ways follow the stories and traditions that you were in. But the problem is that these shepherds of the people, these judges, they fall themselves. They consider themselves truly gods. They desire the worship. And sometimes called the place where the oath is made, they make an oath with human beings. They make an oath upon themselves, and they take on for themselves human wives. And this is where the Nephilim come from.
Right.
So you have a pollution which occurs in the flesh, and after they die, in a lot of traditions, the spirits of these Nephilim are what become the demons in the New Testament. And sometimes the language for demon is literally just the word, like literally the word demon is the word for God. Okay. So you'll hear.
So Elohim?
Yeah, sometimes they're called Elohim. So when the spirit of a man, when Saul goes to the witch of Endor and he calls Samuel up, the spirit of Samuel, what we would call a ghost, he says, the witch says, I see an Elohim coming up. He sees a God. He sees a God coming up, right? I can see into the fire, right, in Daniel. I can see into the fire. There were 3 men, but I see 4 men, and one of them is a child of the Elohim. It's a child of the gods,
okay.
Right? So spiritual. So these characters, the sons of God, see the daughters of men that they're beautiful. That's the story of the Nephilim, right?
Right.
And I again would take the older translation. I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, as the translation. So,
what's your background? What's just a quick about your bio? I don't know if I know.
Yeah, so
much about where you come from.
Yeah, and this becomes confusing to people because I'm a Christian. I was raised very conservative Catholic. My dad's Maltese, which, if you know anything about Maltese Catholicism, we are old school Catholic. Okay, I grew up very, very legit. I was not one of these Christmas and Easter kind of people, but I was raised atheist.
Mel Gibson style Catholic.
Yeah,
In
about there.
Not that far.
Yeah, almost there. First year university, I become I become a Christian, where I start actually legitimately believing in it. I begin going to a evangelical church, Christian Missionary Alliance Church, and my college and career group, because that's when I became a Christian, met on Thursdays. And the Thursday going into Easter, if you are Catholic, you do a special service all about the Lord's Supper.
So did you go? Were you active Catholic and evangelical simultaneously?
There was a period of time where I would have been, but then as I started reading the scriptures, I was just like, I don't think I can be Catholic anymore. That was my personal, like when Jesus, especially, I read Matthew in a week, and by the end of the Gospel of Matthew, I was just like, this is not Catholicism. The
Huh.
criticisms where it's just like, call no man father but your father in
Oh,
heaven.
I see. I see stuff like
And
that. Yeah.
so after you read certain sections like that, and then you're in Catholic Church, you're just like, if this isn't what Jesus was criticizing, I don't know what is. Very much was just my experience. And I didn't have someone guiding me through Matthew. I just read Matthew and just went, this isn't Catholicism.
It put you in crisis, so to speak, that you
Yes.
had to
Yeah.
resolve. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, uh, William is saying got Drambuie. I don't know why you're saying it. I think Drambuie is a delicious liquor, if that's what you're saying, William. I don't know how that affects the conversation that we're having, but yes, Drambuie is delicious. So because of that Holy Thursday thing, um, uh, I wanted to lead something and said, well, we should do it like a communion thing, like a Passover, and I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what Passover meant. But then someone connected me. My youth pastor said, okay, you lead it, you find out what Passover is, and you can lead a Passover communion thing. And I got connected through that. Someone recommended a connection to a Messianic group in Windsor, Ontario, which is where I'm from. And I really took it like a fish to water. And so as a result, I became very, very interested in a Jewish perspective on how Christianity might be practiced. That's how I understand everything. And so as I try to understand more and more Judaism, I can see, and even Jacob would admit this, some of the Jewish traditions that we know about in the Talmud, their earliest written references are in the New Testament. And I think knowing those traditions really explain what is happening in the New Testament. And without that context, we don't understand what they're talking about. So I practice my Christianity from a very, very Jewish perspective, using this terminology. And hopefully, and I hope that if Jacob is watching or if I have conversations with Jacob, he feels that I'm honoring those traditions, even if I differ with him. And yeah.
So that led you to study Hebrew specifically, or
Yes,
you
yeah,
mostly
I did get a BA in religious studies, and when I did that, and you could fill up your course in a variety of ways, everything I did, I focused on Hebrew scriptures. That's how I focused on everything. I didn't take any biblical Greek. I did 4 classes, full university level classes in biblical Hebrew. I took no Greek. In my mind, the New Testament is Hebrew speakers writing in Greek. These ideas are being translated. And if you understand the Hebrew Bible, then the New Testament is actually in many places not very complicated. I have a whole spiel where it's like, which I haven't shared to too much extent. If you know Yom Kippur in detail and how the temple practices occurred, the book of Revelation is actually kind of clear. It's like very clear what metaphors are being used. I don't mean as a way of predicting the end of the world. I mean what metaphors, how you're supposed to receive things it's just so clear if you know Yom Kippur. It's kind of funny. Like it is easy, and I don't mean this as like a prideful thing. Anyone can do this. You have to repeatedly study Yom Kippur. I've been practicing it for 20 years. And somewhere in the middle of that 20 years of practicing Yom Kippur, all of a sudden I read the book of Revelation, and it's easy to picture. It's not complicated. I'm not like, wait, what is that? So no, it's pretty clear. Yeah, and that's kind of the perspective that I bring within stuff. It's also, yeah, I should stop.
Unfortunately, no, that's great. That's very helpful. Unfortunately, I'll definitely try your formula, so to speak. Give it a whirl. I've never put the two and two together. But unfortunately, when you have equally or equivalently expert theologians in Hebrew studies of various traditions coming up to radically different interpretations of Revelation or of the New Testament. So I love the idea. It would be beautiful if I could connect my mind to yours and I could see exactly the way you're seeing and plug in just what you're. I interpret the New Testament through the Old Testament in just the way you describe. Unfortunately, human brains don't seem to work like that.
So
You can give everybody the same level of education and come up with a whole variety of interpretations.
So just so you know, Mark, part of my view on this is not built on education. The majority of the stuff I learned through practicing it, not through education. And if you practice it over and over again, I think there's things that rise forward that even connections that I think become almost, it's like an experience. It becomes an experience more than anything else. And so when you have some of
celebrating, I'm sorry, let me just interrupt real quick. Celebrating, do you see a distinction between celebrating the holiday Yom Kippur and are there practices that you've discerned or developed that would be more yogic in nature? That aren't necessarily a holiday celebration, but actually a physical practice. And I'm not sure how you do that, but go ahead. Do you see what I'm asking?
Yeah. So a lot of, for instance, Yom Kippur, it's different I think the biblical feasts are a good entry point into a lot of, this is interesting because we were talking about spiritual practice earlier, about shamanic states and all this other stuff. And I think that this is very important because when you are practicing something like Passover, or Yom Kippur or any of these things, and you read the scripture that relates to Yom Kippur on Yom Kippur, great. Okay, you read it once. Sometimes it means something. Sometimes you're just like, I don't even know what that refers to. But then next year on Yom Kippur, you read the same passage. And then next year you read the same passage and you read the same passage and you read the same passage. And then all of a sudden you're a Christian who has read Leviticus way more times than other Christians have. But less than the person who wrote the book of Revelation practiced and read that passage. You then are getting what the references that they're making is. Let me, and some of it, honestly, interest in the images and looking at the images. A lot of my learning is not learning through reading; it's learning in combination with archaeology to see something. So let me share an image with you, and I'll show you what I mean. So this is a presentation which I really need to do and have just Yosef and Jacob and Hezi just tear me to shreds on. So this is an example of the bronze altar for the tabernacle. Okay, an offering would be made on the top. Okay, and at the bottom they would lift this thing up so you can see the ramp going up to it. And at the bottom, you can kind of see under this altar. Can you see that, Mark? See that all right? Just a little bit. So when you made the offering, the ashes would come down to the bottom. Okay? So you could, once the creature was incinerated or whatever remains were incinerated on that, the ashes would be at the bottom. That's where the remains of the animal would be, if that makes sense. Um, but then you compare that. So this is from the book of Revelation, from Revelation 6:9. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness they had borne. They cried out with a loud voice, O sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long before you will judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then they were each given white robes and told to rest a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who would be killed as they themselves had been. So within this section of Revelation, you have an altar. They can see, John can see under the altar, just like when the sacrifices were made, you could see under the altar the remains, and he sees that the people who were sacrificed are given white robes. That is what the priests would wear. The priests, while making the offerings, you can see in this image here. And so now I have these images in my mind of these priests in white robes, and I can see the altar, and I know that under the altar, that's where sacrifices and stuff would be made. When I read that section of Revelation, it's not confusing to me. I can picture the altar, I can picture the robes. It's all there. And so reading through it, then reading Revelation itself is an experience for me. It's like a drama. It's dramatic poetry explaining this ritual occurring not just on earth, but occurring in heaven. And so taking these images, I feel like there's an openness, like a form of Christianity that could be practiced, where through these Jewish traditions, you then can read something like Revelation as a ritual text, as a text of experiencing almost a psychedelic Yom Kippur, for lack of better terms.
Well, that's a very vivid illustration you've given. I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't know if it would carry through chapter and verse through the whole thing. I'd really take a lot of work to try to see how they mesh together. But I think the thesis is certainly worth exploring.
Well,
in depth. I like it. I like it a lot.
So, Mark, this is an artist depiction based on Solomon's description of Solomon's temple, the Holy of Holies. Okay. Cherubim on the left and on the right, giant ones touching the wall. But then there's two on the lid of the ark. Okay.
Yeah.
So you have God's throne room in which there are 4 cherubim. Okay. That is in Ezekiel and in Revelation, that is what God's throne room looks like. There are 4 of these creatures in the throne room, and this throne room is a gold cube. Okay. The Holy of Holies is as large, is as wide as it is tall. Okay. So when you get to the end of the book of Revelation, when God's dwelling comes down from heaven, and it's described as the holy city, Jerusalem, and that city is a perfect gold cube, that to me, again, is, okay.
Yeah.
I know what a perfect gold cube is. That's God's dwelling place. That's God's throne room. The image at the end of Revelation is that we are living within that. And if you understand that, in Ezekiel's vision of the New Jerusalem, there is a working temple. In Revelation, there isn't, but the city itself is the temple. That's what I would say. That's how you can actually bridge those things. They're not a contradiction, because for Revelation, the city is the Holy of Holies.
Yeah. No, yeah, I see it. No, I agree. I like that. I would love for you to present some of this or do a full presentation to Brandon Dempsey.
Oh
What's
yeah,
it's a three name. What's his three? What
yeah.
are his three names? Oh,
Brandon
is it?
Second Dempsey. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I think
now I
it's
can't
perfect
remember.
because I just finished his second interview with Christian last night, and uh, it might bring out more meta for him than modern. I love it. I think you need because he's very much stuck in the modern groove, so that
Right.
he wants to he wants to kind of cram the spiritual experience into the modern frame, hence
Yeah.
meta modern. And I think that's where the break happens. That's where most of us can't make the leap with him, or he can't
Mhm.
make the leap with us. I don't. One of us, some of it, I don't know where it's, but there's some schism that's not being bridged yet. And this could be a way to get at it.
Well,
And he
and
has a
I
background
certainly
that
felt that experiencing my faith in this way um, made me immune to deconstruction because I was already thinking of things in a completely different way. And Judaism has a culture, and Christianity does not have a culture. And I think that Christianity should have a culture. And so little practices like this to me ingrain certain concepts. I just want to say this as well. So in the book of Revelation, God's sitting on his throne, and before him are seven lights. What and sometimes it is depicted as though those are seven separate lights. There's not seven separate lights. If you're picturing
right.
this as a Jew would, what does seven flames look like? It looks like a menorah, which is what's in the temple before the Holy of Holies, right? It's like this is what he's picturing, right? Before the throne room, there is an altar of incense, right? And that altar had burning coals on it because you would place the incense on these burning coals. So when Isaiah has a vision of a heavenly creature taking a coal off of the altar of incense, placing it on his mouth, um, this is what he's seeing. He, it's like to me, it's almost like um, again, I don't want to sound arrogant.
Have you created a playlist of videos on this yet?
No, I'm collecting a lot of the information myself. A lot of this stuff is rather new. But what I'm showing you right here is all from a PowerPoint presentation that I've done a couple of times and would love to do for a group of people who are interested.
Hell, I'll be your audience. Do it.
Yeah.
No,
So
I love it. Sorry, I shouldn't say hell.
no,
It's
you
the
can say
pagan
hell.
in
I'm
me.
fine with it.
Hell, we're talking about heaven.
Look, I did a lot of work with the homeless in downtown Toronto, and you're
Yeah,
not going to use any words that are going to offend me, Mark.
yeah. I'm still getting converted. I'm working at it.
Well,
Uh,
so I wonder even, oh, this is good, Mark, because you asking me these questions. I then started experiencing this became the frame, these Jewish traditions became the frame in which I understood my faith and my own traditions. It became how I understood reading the New Testament. And as a result, that also becomes the frame in which I have spiritual experiences, right? So it
when you
wouldn't
say experiences, what do you mean?
it means that um, for a month, uh, 15 years ago, I was lactose intolerant, and I stopped being lactose intolerant after Pentecost. And for Christians, that means nothing, but for Jews, that means something. Because there are feasts which you eat meat at, and there are feasts which you eat dairy at. And the Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, you celebrate by eating dairy. And I was lactose intolerant for a period of my life that overlapped with the Feast of Weeks and stopped afterwards. And I felt God was communicating to me in that.
And how did you how did you interpret what's the significance of the event, and how did you interpret it?
Right. So for me, the significance of it, milk is a metaphor for as the food of infants. And so being unable to even eat the food of infants, that would, the way that I wrote it in my own journal was, it curdled, like the milk curdled within me, right? It's as though it was always spoiled within me. And I was thinking, it's interesting, we're moving away from it now, but when I was thinking about it is, we live in a tradition where the men scrape their faces with razors. And the image to me was infancy, loving youth, wanting to be young, not wanting to be old, not wanting to be mature. And then within that context, being unable to consume milk.
Nice.
Yeah. So this all, and then this is all related to the Feast of Weeks is when in the Old Testament, when Moses receives the law. So in the New Testament, it's receiving the law on our hearts. But the image I was getting from God with all these things happening in my own life lined up with the biblical feasts was, if I fed you, you'd spit it out. How do you, and one of the images to me as well was anorexia, is like God within Scripture will sometimes send famine to bring about repentance. And the image I had of North America is, what famine could be sent to a people that starve themselves? So like this image becomes this biblical image of how God led to repentance, how God led to maturity, and how we're basically within a structure unable to move towards maturity.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's and again, it's more images than a Bible study.
So you have are these just thoughts, or slightly visionary? Do you find shifts in your state of mind in that when you get these thoughts? Is it just, I'm thinking and the light comes on?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just
comes to you, huh?
Yeah, I mean, if you watch a movie over and over again, sometimes you'll catch a character and you'll say, that is exactly like my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And then every time you watch it again, you can see it clear as day. And you can see how your mom would act in particular situations, right?
Yeah.
And for me, this liturgical practice, which I use that term because we have so many Orthodox within the corner, people have become interested in these things. To me, that is why God gave these traditions. And so to find myself operating within these traditions gives me spiritual experiences which I can interpret not separate from Scripture, but within Scripture itself.
Yeah.
And you can see that that there's certain stories which are connected, right? So within, so Feast of Weeks is coming up. That is related to the harvest of barley, okay? That is related to so on that feast day, they read Ruth. So every single year on that day, I read Ruth. So I read Ruth regularly. I will be reading Ruth next week. I actually am thinking that because that's coming up next week. Shalom. Chezi is giving a Bokatov. I'm at, yeah. I'm at Yom by now. I'm Yom Tov. That's morning versus day. So understanding my life through these rhythms, I think gives a more holistic picture of things, gives a freedom, and also places myself within a tradition so that I can decipher the different bits, because this is connected to that, right? So the Jewish New Year trumpets is in my mind connected to the sacrifice of Isaac, or the almost.
Now, where do you fellowship? Where do you fellowship locally?
Yeah, this is my big problem, Mark, because I'm not within a community of people that
It's
do.
hard for all of us, so that's okay.
Yeah. Luckily, I have a wife who's fully on board. And so
Okay.
we, with a group of our friends, celebrate Passover every single year and invite people in to celebrate with us. And it's interesting because I've been celebrating with the same group of people for 3 years now. And there's certain light bulbs that connect in their mind on year 3 that weren't there year 1.
Okay.
And so, I mean, that's kind of what it is that that again is why I don't think of it as study. I don't think of it as school. The major things that I learned, I didn't learn in Bible college. And how many Orthodox Jews do you discuss this with? Well, Hezi, that's why I want to talk. That's Hezi is saying that. How many Orthodox Jews do you discuss this with? Not enough. That's why I need you. That's why I need you, Hezi. And that's one of the problems is, who's going to let me in? It's going to be the most liberal Jews are the ones who are going to be so happy for me to be attending Torah study. And I only get so much out of that. Yeah, because I'm not trying to be a Noahide. I'm trying to be a Christian. Yeah. So me and Hezi are going to have a conversation where I'm just going to lay out my observations on the Messianic movement is a very new movement, and it is not a movement that's having a lot of conversations directly with Orthodox Jews. They're kind of in opposition to each other, kind of like worst enemies, to some extent. Like Jacob identifies a guy part of a Messianic organization who is in the corner as almost genocidal, like as being wanting to remove Jews from existence.
Oh yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah, so I need to have a conversation with Hezi about some of these traditions related to the Feast of Weeks, because I'm thinking about all these things and I want to hear his thoughts. If I just read, I'll give an example. So I just said Feast of Weeks / Pentecost is related to David, is related to the book of Ruth. Okay. In Acts 2, when it's Pentecost, what illustration does Peter use? In Judaism, it's believed to be the day that David is born and the day that David died. Okay, righteous people would have their death day and either their birthday or their conception day be the same. That was like seen as a good sign. It's interesting because you'll still see that people will sometimes people die around their birthday. It's a weird phenomenon that I've observed many times.
It's true.
That used to be considered a very good omen that person was.
Really? I had no idea. My father died within a week of his birthday or something like that.
Yeah, that's considered a good sign. So I don't want to unpack your dad right now, but either way.
Oh, that's good. No, it's my dad's passing has some weird spiritual significance. I could share that at some point, but there's some weird stuff around that.
Yeah, in traditional Judaism and Christianity, that your father died related to his birthday would be considered a sign that you should really take notice of. So that's exactly what I mean. So once you have that in your mind and then something like that happens, you don't merely
it's not something you'll forget. You'll see it when you start seeing that pattern.
That's right. Once you see the pattern, then the pattern happens in your life.
Oh no, I've slipped into a Peugeot frame of mind.
Yeah. But so when Peter preaches at
I'm
Hebrews.
being colonized.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, with Peter and Hebrews.
He quotes a
Peter and
Davidic
Acts.
psalm. Peter quotes a Davidic psalm on Pentecost and says, "Now,
Yeah.
brothers, I want you to know with full assurance that our father David died and is buried, and his grave is with us to this day."
Yes.
So then, why did he say this? That's what Peter says. Okay. Now he is saying that on the anniversary of David's death in Judaism. So even why he picks what he says on that day is related to how Jews celebrated that.
See, I didn't realize David died on or near Pentecost. I didn't
Yes.
realize that.
Yeah. But so when you know that, when that becomes a little thing that you know, then 2 years after celebrating, all of a sudden I'm reading Acts and I go, oh, that is why that's there. Right. And then again, this becomes a pattern as Edith Turner experienced for herself. You experience for yourself these connections. Right.
Right.
So Hezi will I think I've heard him mention, I don't know if he's gone into detail about this, but each one of the biblical feasts is related to different parts of a marriage ceremony. Okay. So there's, getting the bride, there's the legal document that is signed, right? There's the wedding feast, and then there's the consummation. So in the New Testament and in the Old Testament, consummation is lined up with, even within some Christian traditions, they will refer to the second coming of Christ as the consummation. Consummation, if you're thinking in marital terms, doesn't just refer, right? It's the marriage supper of the Lamb. And there are Jews that specifically will get married during the Feast of Tabernacles. That's related to consummation. That's how the biblical thinkers are thinking of it. And when, at the very end, when the holy city of Jerusalem is coming down in the book of Revelations, it uses the word tabernacle, right? God's dwelling, to speak of Christ dwelling with us. It says Christ will dwell with his people. But the word that is used is the word for tabernacle. He will tabernacle with his people.
Right.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack, Mark. But this is an example of how we can start seeing patterns within our own lives. It changes how I understand Christ being baptized. It changes how I understand baptism itself. These are all traditions that, yeah, like Edith Turner entering. It's interesting. Edith talks about this in other places, that her experience with the spiritual was based on what community she was a part of, right? And that's part of even some of the things that are offensive, because how Orthodox Christianity understands Hindu gods is different than how they're understood within a different tradition, right? So you take a particular frame and then you say, that's how I'm going to understand things, right? But it kind of feels... Did you ever watch Game of Thrones? It's a bad... Yeah, I don't recommend the end of that show. But at the beginning, they would always show the map. And as you continue through the seasons, they were showing more and more map. The map gets bigger and bigger. And
I always skip the intro when I watch it.
But in a lot of those stories, you would get to this like edge of the map, but you know that the map goes on, right? You meet a well-written character and you know they have a life before and after the scene that you're watching, right?
Right.
And the biblical world is like that, where it isn't fully explained. It sometimes hits on a bigger world. Witch of Endor is an example of that, which is like,
your hermeneutic is really, this is a great way of, I don't know if it's taught anywhere as such.
Well, so
I'm
this
trying to think,
me,
because it's, you go to Yale, even the big schools, right? Yale Divinity or whatever, it's going to be Old Testament and Hebrew scripture studies, and it's going to be New Testament and Christian studies, and the twain do not always meet. It's just
Yeah, and to me, a Christian should, if you focus on Hebrew studies, the New Testament makes perfect sense. And it's like I do next to no.
But
I did.
those experts will often point out, I mean, their point of view is Bart Ehrman, right? These are Greek people, met generally, writing about a Jewish movement, but and yes, Jesus was a Jew, but Jesus probably didn't speak Hebrew in day-to-day life. He would have spoken Aramaic. He even and then they'll question whether he was even literate. Of course, I don't know from the Gospels how you could say he's not literate, but so you see a whole variety from modern scholarship, and even if you go into conservative seminaries, they still tend to buy into the modern historical view. They're constantly trying to justify their conservative views along the framework of historical criticism. You know what I'm saying?
So in Judaism, it's tied directly to memory. Listen, act, remember. Okay, and memory is considered to be something that you do, not something that just happens. Right? Oh, I just remembered that. Right? Instead, you do practices that God has given us so that we remember. And that's how you get the theology deep in your bones.
Right.
That is how I practice. And through that practice, then New Testament passages are completely obvious. And it's difficult to have conversations with people about some of this stuff because, so Chezi is rewarding me by saying, correct, David. Yes. So that's how you remember things, right? So if you forget your wife's birthday, that is not accidental. You remember your wife's birthday because you put the effort into remembering, and that's why she's upset when you forget her birthday. Because remembering and forgetting is not accidental. It's not floating about. Remembering, this will come into my conversation with Chad I'm going to have soon. Remembering is to gather the pieces back together, right? Members of a body, to remember is to bring the pieces back together, right? And so when you are Jewish and you practice Passover, you don't practice Passover as though it's a historical event. So when your children ask you, why do we do this? You say, because we were slaves in the land of Egypt. You don't say our forefathers were slaves in the land of Egypt. And that this rubric is actually given in Deuteronomy. So at the end of Deuteronomy, it's after I'm rambling and I have to go soon in like the next 10 minutes. But in Deuteronomy, the people who he pulled out of Egypt have all died in the wilderness, right? But he says to the people in Deuteronomy, who we know are not the generation he pulled out of Egypt, because that generation has died, he says to them, God did not take your fathers out of Egypt. He took you out of Egypt. Not with your fathers did he make a covenant, but with you did he make a covenant, right? He is saying, and as a Christian, I don't think that Jesus died for the people who lived 2,000 years ago. I think he died for me, right? You remember not as though it happened to someone else in history. You act as though that is personal. It personally occurred to you. You do these practices that ingrain the understanding that I was a slave in Egypt. That's how I understand myself. I was a slave. I am a slave.
Mhm.
Okay. I am a freed slave. That's how I understand myself. And when I act unjustly, it is because I have forgotten. And
No, it's
forgetting,
Paul in Romans. You were slaves to sin.
that's right. That's right. So you are slaves, but now you understand yourself as being freed, right? As God being the one who frees you. That is, God is your redeemer. That's what redeeming is. It's literally to buy back a slave, is what redeeming is. That's what God did for Israel. But it's also when he bought a wife, right? When he gave the bridal price in order for the wife. Um, hey Hezi, if God is the groom, what was the bridal price that the groom had to pay? Just wondering your thoughts.
It's just I'm closing. It's funny that all this comes up the way it does. I was just had a conversation with someone in the corner and privately, and I just said uh, that I don't. I really. I well, the idea was the mind is, I struggle with kind of certain theoretical things. I don't think imagistically, and I said I really in fact I really don't think until I stop thinking, until a subject sort of enters muscle memory, then I can actually begin to think deeply about it. It really has to move from somewhere up here into somewhere else in the system where I'm really not even thinking about it. Then I can begin to think about it.
right,
Then the insights start to really come. Um,
right.
so I think that's something of what you're talking about.
Well, and so that's the thing that upsets me sometimes about this messianic stuff is I have been brought into churches to do Passover. And sometimes they just want to bring me in a couple of times. Oh, we haven't had him in a while. Let's bring that guy back, right? And for me, this isn't something that you bring into a church. This is something that you practice in yourself. And then when you start doing it, it becomes how you see the world, right? And
Right.
that is how God designed these traditions.
But it seems like a life's work for you to put that, to make that as a something that Christians can study and reference, because you kind of you need it's a book, at least one,
Right.
to put down what you're thinking. Because I don't.
Well, so this is the thing is
rather
I think I kind of want to make it. I've been working on a presentation specifically related to the temple, just for Christians to be able to understand. And I want Hezi just to tear me apart about it. But when I did this presentation, one of my friends was like, it was strange because it was so many images. So I'll just, without explanation, I'll show you what the presentation looks like. Where for me, going through this stuff, it's in order to understand it, it's not reading words. It's having images in your mind so that when you are reading scripture, you're able to picture it. You're able, because again, without visuals, if it's just oral or literary, it's in your head. Visualizing is the ability to embody, right? So having visuals, right? Like it is easy for me to take this image and then think about Revelation with this image in mind. Okay? What you are seeing right here.
Mhm.
Right?
It's very funny though, because I've seen illustrations like this many times before over my lifetime, but I don't. Maybe it's because the sources or the teachers that I came across with those pictures never made the connection that you're making. But I think you've taught me something new to look at and a new approach. I like it.
Well, it's again, I like you spoke of it as a hermeneutic, and I agree. It is a hermeneutic, but it's a hermeneutic of life. It to me is, and this is what I think a lot of the Orthodox are trying to get out of all this stuff, is you enter into the tradition and then that becomes how you practice. And some of those insights you only get 20 years in. I've been doing this for 20 years, right? And some of my understanding of the book of Revelation related to Yom Kippur, you only get after doing it for 20 years. And that's not what people want. People want, can I sit in the seminar and then I'll understand it, right? I'm so thankful that I grew up, even though I don't identify as Catholic and think that there was a lot of problems with that interpretation. I am so thankful I grew up Catholic because we went to church every single week. And even though I didn't believe it, I heard those stories over and over and over and over again. So when I became Christian, it's like those stories all became real. And I had this resource, this wealth of things, which is it's not a lecture. It's so deep in me because of this.
Well, maybe instead of thinking of the space that you could work and minister in, as instead of thinking of as a church, think of it as a yoga studio. People come in, do the exercises, do the practices, and go out. And it's just you got your weekly training. Oh, Tuesday, 2 a.m. or 2 p.m.
Well,
Okay,
so,
time to go in and do such and such or whatever. I'm being slightly tongue in cheek.
yeah. So the term for practicing the Passover is called it literally translates to tell the children. Okay, and it's because you have to get the children to remember where they come, who we are. So that's Passover, and you can find messianic ones, and I think that a lot of them don't fully appreciate what Judaism is. And what I've been doing is like I've helped my friend's church practice it himself. He brought me in 6 times. And then at some point, my wife said, I don't think you're supposed to do it again. I don't want you doing it. And I had to pray, why doesn't she want me to do this? This is like such a thing that I love doing and seeing people experience it and everything. And I realized it shouldn't be me leading it. And so I taught him how to practice it himself.
Okay.
And so I wanted him to do it himself. And that is also part of the replicating thing and why there's a replication crisis within Christianity. And what I mean by that is like the pastor lives a life, has an understanding that the people don't have. Whereas in Judaism, it's the father that leads the
Right.
family in doing this. And so you have that in the families. And that's more, I'm trying to help people be able to do this themselves.
Cool.
It's like during COVID, people talked about growing their own food. That's what I want. To have our own memories, to make our own connections, to do that ourselves and not having to pay pastors to give us these hermeneutics. Instead, it's your life.
Well, this is a space to do it. Thank you, David.
Yeah, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much, Mark, for tuning in.
Hope I didn't derail you.
No, it's all good. Mark, if you want to email me, I'm going to share it. I don't care that other people will find it out.
I think I did put your email in mine. I just never got around to contacting you. But yeah.
Okay, yeah. Because it's just my name, which people can see there. david.j.buzatil@gmail.com. All lowercase. Happy to have a more in-depth conversation with anyone about these topics.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Very passionate about it, obviously.
No, you have a lot to offer. So thank you, David.
Thank you. And to everyone else, by Mark, to everyone else, this is the article which we started talking about, called The Reality of Spirits, a Tabooed or Permitted Field of Study. You just type in Edith Turner, The Reality of Spirits, you're going to find it. It's very good. And I want to know, I'm so glad Mark was here that we could figure out how that might relate to Christianity. Okay. Love you all. Thank you for coming in, and maybe in the future I'll do my full presentation on Yom Kippur, to be ripped apart and to hear everyone's thoughts. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.